Gather around, everyone. Let me tell you about the time I got absolutely dragged through the comments and deserved every word of it. Picture this: young, naive Emily discovers I think I said that right. The Japanese phoenix. This magnificent bird of virtue and grace appeared only in times of peace and prosperity, with its gorgeous five-colored plumage, each one representing the Confucian virtues. I was completely enchanted by the concept. Gorgeous, right? Profound symbolism, stunning imagery. So, naturally, I thought this would make an amazing foundation for a fantasy creature in my story. And that's where I face planted into the cultural appropriation minefield. I had taken this significant Japanese mythological symbol, stripped away all the content or context of its cultural and meaning behind it, slapped some generic fantasy elements on it, and called it original world building. The comment section, well, let's just say I learned some very, very good lessons on respect that day. I pulled the video, deleted the story, and spent a very uncomfortably long week reflecting on what I had actually done. Here's the problem. I genuinely thought that I was being respectful. I wasn't mocking anything. I was inspired by something beautiful and historic, and I wanted to honor it. But the inspiration without understanding is just good appropriation with great intentions. And great intentions don't magically make something okay. This is crucial for writers because we're constantly drawing from the real world. We're like magpies, collecting shiny bits of culture, history, tradition to weave into our stories. But there's a difference between being inspired by something and just taking it. And if you're creating any kind of speculative fiction, having a hard time with big words today, fantasy, or even contemporary work that touches on spiritual or cultural practices, you need to know where that line is. Because trust me, stepping over it hurts. Both the communities you borrow from and your own credibility as a creator. So let's get our definitions straight because cultural appropriation gets thrown around a lot, often incorrectly, and that dilutes its actual meaning. Okay, no holds barred. So, cultural appropriation is taking elements from a culture that is not your own, particularly the sacred, significant, or even closed practices of that culture, and using them without permission, understanding, or basic respect. It's essentially problematic when there's a power imbalance involved, like when dominant cultures profit from or trivialize practices that marginalized communities have been persecuted for maintaining. But here's where it gets tricky for writers. Yet again, like I said, it's a fine line that we toe every day. Because not all cultural borrowing is appropriation. Let me explain. So, humans have been sharing, adapting, and building on each other's ideas since we figured out how to make fire. The problem isn't inspiration, it's the exploitation. Cultural appropriation in storytelling often looks like taking sacred practices and turning them into generic fantasy elements, using cultural aesthetics without understanding the meaning or significance behind them, profiting from cultural elements while the originating communities face discrimination, or perpetuating harmful stereotypes or reducing rich traditions to mystical window dressing. The methodical aesthetic copy paste approach I mentioned, that's when writers see something that looks cool or exotic and then grab it. They want the visual appeal, the sense of ancient wisdom, the mystical vibes. But they don't want to do the work of understanding what they're actually using. Just think of how many fantasy books and novels out there feature vision quests that are basically just protagonist goes into the woods, has trippy experience, emerges enlightened. The writer wants that transformative journey archetype, but they're using the specific cultural framework of indigenous vision quests without understanding what the practice actually means to the communities that create them. This matters because it reduces the living traditions to aesthetic choices. It turns sacred practices into plot devices, and it often perpetuates the exact stereotypes that have been used to marginalize these communities for centuries. Let's use vision quests as our case study because they're everywhere in fantasy literature, and most writers are utilizing them wrong. A vision quest in many indigenous traditions isn't just go into nature and have spiritual experience. It's much more than that. It's a specific rite of passage with deep cultural significance, particular protocols, community involvement, and sacred elements that vary between different tribes and nations. It's not a generic wilderness therapy session. It's a cultural practice with specific meaning and context. But here's the thing, that underlining human experience that vision quests address, that's universal. The need for transformation, for rites of passage, for moments of solitude and reflection that help us grow. That's part of being human, and my cat agrees. You can absolutely explore those things in your writing without appropriating specific cultural practices. So it begs the question, how do you do this respectively? Well, here's a framework you can use. Step 1, identify the universal versus the specific. What draws you to the practice? Is it the solitude, the transformation, the connection to nature, the community recognition of growth? You need to focus on the universal human need and not the specific cultural expression. Step 2, you need to create your own cultural context. Instead of borrowing the Vision Quest framework word by word or idea by idea, create your own society's approach to that universal need that it addresses. Like, what would transformation rituals look like in the world you create? And how would your fictional culture approach the coming of age or spiritual growth? Step 3, do your research anyway. Please. Even if you're not directly using the practice, understanding it helps you avoid accidentally recreating those harmful stereotypes. You need to learn about the real thing so you can make sure your fictional version doesn't perpetuate the misconceptions. And the last step is to add layers of meaning. See, real cultural practices are complex with multiple layers of meaning, community involvement, and practical considerations. Your fictional versions should have that same amount of depth, just not be the character goes up to the mountain and comes back irrelevant and comes back a spiritual leader. It kind of, there's so much wrong with that, not gonna lie. Because, for example, instead of having your protagonist go on a vision quest, um, what I did was I did a truth walking type of thing where the individuals spend time in their equivalent of sacred spaces, but with completely different protocols, meanings, and cultural significance that was developed specifically for my own world. And then we get to the tropes. Let me share some tropes that are seemingly harmless but are actually built on cultural appropriation and how I've learned to handle them better. So, you have the wise insert culture mentor. And you know this one by heart, everybody. We all do. It's the mysterious elder who speaks only in cryptic wisdom, usually from a culture the author knows nothing about. I used to do this all the time. I'd create these ancient order mentors who clearly were inspired by specific cultural archetypes, but with none of the actual cultural understanding. My fix, after quite a few failed attempts, was I created mentors who were products of my fictional world's specific culture and history. I gave them motivations and flaws and wisdom that came from my personal story's context, not from whatever culture I thought would look wise and mystical and be the perfect fit. It never works. Then you get the sacred object, MacGuffin. Oh, I don't like this trope. Like, seriously. Because taking religious or sacred objects and turning them into generic magical items is beyond annoying. Because dream catchers become nightmare deflectors. Come on, be more creative than that. And medicine wheels become elemental focuses. Really? Come on. We can do better, guys. We are smart enough to do better. Because what I do now is I create objects that serve the similar functions, but with completely original cultural significance. Instead of borrowing a dream catcher, I might create a sleep weaving tradition unique to my culture with its own materials, methods, and meanings. True, I may describe it like a dream catcher, but, well, no, I actually can that thought. Because I can't. But what I actually did was I kind of described it like you would if you were making a basket, which is not really cultural, I want to say cultural significance, but it's just not it's different for every culture out there, so it's a pretty safe object to use in reference to whatever you create in your own worlds. Um and then you get to the mystical minority. And we all know several books that are like this. Several. So this is where writers use cultural practices to make certain characters more spiritual, more connected to nature, and it often reinforces stereotypes about which cultures are better or less than others. My approach, I've changed. I make sure now that spiritual practices in my fiction are distributed evenly, or as evenly as possible, across different cultures in the world. And it's not concentrated in groups that resemble real world communities. And then you get the spiritual tourism plot. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, it's your classic character from dominant culture goes to insert exotic location, learns ancient wisdom, becomes enlightened. Bullcrap. I've definitely written many versions of this, guilty as charged, without realizing just how problematic this was. How I handle it now is if I want to write about transformation through cultural exchange, I make sure it's reciprocal, such as what does the protagonist offer in return? How are they changed by giving as much as receiving? And I create fictional cultures for this exchange rather than borrowing from real ones. After my Ho-Oh disaster, I went back through the work and found so many instances where I did this kind of lazy writing borrowing. It was so humbling, not gonna lie. But it also made my world building stronger. Because when you can't rely on borrowed cultural weight, you're kind of forced to dig deep and create your own, which is really wonderful. So here's what I want you guys to take away from this. Heavy, heavy topic. Cultural appropriation isn't about walking on eggshells or never being inspired by anything. It's about doing the work. Good world building isn't just borrowing cool elements from this place and that place and filing off the serial numbers so nobody can guess what it is. It's about understanding why those elements work within the culture, what human needs they address, and how you can create something that is new that serves those same needs within your own story. So, when you do get inspired by a real world practice, I want you to ask yourself some questions. What specifically drew you to this? What universal human experience does it address? How can you explore that personal experience through your own culture? And are you perpetuating stereotypes or creating something genuinely new? And finally, would someone from this culture see my work as respectful or exploitative? See, the main goal, isn't to avoid all cultural influence. It's impossible and very unnecessary. The goal is to be thoughtful, respectful, and creative enough to transform your inspiration into something original and meaningful. So, your homework, I want you to look at your current work in progress, and it doesn't have to be a book, it can be anything content, a video, a short, whatever. Find one element that you borrowed from a real culture. Then dig deeper. What drew you to it? What human experience does it represent? And how can you honor that inspiration by creating a fictional version that's completely your own? See, this isn't about being politically correct or avoiding offense. This is about being a better writer. When you do the work of understanding and creating more than just copying, your world building becomes richer, more authentic, and more engaging. Plus, you avoid getting destroyed in the comment section, which is always a bonus. Now, here's your official challenge. Take a cultural concept that challenges you and fascinates you. A ritual, a spiritual practice, a social tradition, whatever catches your interest. Don't name the specific culture, but do tell me what draws you to it. Then we'll world build a fictional version that captures what you love about it while making it completely your own. Drop your ideas in the comments below. I want to see how creative we get when we put in the actual work instead of borrowing an aesthetic. I'll share my own attempts too eventually. Because after all, we're all learning here, and the best way to get better is to practice together. Craving more fantasy, world building, or writer chaos? Check the links below. My blog is loaded with extras. My books are ready to sweep you away, and I'm always posting updates on X and Facebook. Hit like, subscribe, and enjoy the adventure.